They built the tallest structures on Earth, and nobody used a wheel to do it. For 3,000 years, one civilization outlasted every rival that ever tried to erase it, and then one single winter, it simply stopped. Not conquered in a day, not burned to the ground. It just ran out of gods that still worked. We are going to follow this civilization from its violent birth on the banks of the Nile, through the age of the pyramids, through a golden age of warrior pharaohs and forgotten queens, to the boy king whose death mattered more than his life, and finally to the last queen of Egypt, a woman who came closer than anyone in history to ruling the entire known world, and lost. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly how one river created one of the most stable civilizations humanity has ever produced, and exactly what finally broke it. Egypt shouldn't exist. 96% of its land is uninhabitable desert. But running through the middle of that desert is a single river that floods on a predictable schedule every single year, depositing a strip of black, fertile soil on either bank. The Egyptians called their land Kemet, the Black Land, named after that strip of mud that made everything else possible. Around 3100 BC, Egypt existed as two separate kingdoms: Upper Egypt in the south, Lower Egypt in the north, at the river's delta. A king named Narmer, some historians believe this is the same man later legends call Menes, conquered the north and united both kingdoms under one crown. Literally one crown. A double crown combining the white of the south and the red of the north, worn by every pharaoh who followed him for the next 3,000 years. That single act of unification created something almost no other ancient civilization achieved: political continuity. Egypt would rise and fall, get invaded and reunited. But the basic idea of Egypt, one river, one king, one land, survived for longer than the gap between the fall of Rome and today. By 2650 BC, Egypt had entered what we call the Old Kingdom, and its rulers had a problem most kings would envy: too much stability, too much wealth, and a religious obligation to prove it. But that stability depended on an enormous amount of organization that is easy to miss when we look only at the monuments. The state had to measure fields, collect grain, organize thousands of workers, move stone across the country, feed entire workforces, and coordinate all of it from a centralized administration. The pyramids were therefore more than tombs. They were demonstrations that the Egyptian state could turn the resources of an entire kingdom into one enormous permanent project. The same bureaucracy that collected taxes and managed the Nile was capable of transforming stone, labor, food, and religious belief into architecture on a scale the ancient world had rarely seen. The pharaoh wasn't just a king. He was a living god, the physical embodiment of the sky god Horus, and upon death, he became Osiris, ruler of the underworld. This wasn't decoration. Egyptians genuinely believed the pharaoh's soul needed a permanent, indestructible home to guarantee the continued order of the universe. That belief is the entire reason the pyramids exist. The first attempt, the step pyramid at Saqqara, was really just an oversized staircase to heaven, a stack of mastaba tombs on top of each other. It worked, and Egyptian engineers spent the next century refining the concept until they got to Giza. The Great Pyramid of Khufu, completed around 2560 BC, contains roughly 2.3 million stone blocks, some weighing over 2.5 tons, assembled with a level of precision that modern engineers still study. It was the tallest human-made structure on Earth for 3,800 years, a record not broken until the 1300s. And they built it without iron tools, without the wheel for transport, and almost certainly without slave labor in the way Hollywood imagines it. Archaeological evidence from workers' villages near Giza shows paid laborers, fed well, with their own cemetery and medical care. Seasonal farmers doing state labor when the Nile flooded their fields anyway. I want to be direct about something here. The pyramids weren't built by desperation. They were built by a civilization so confident in its own permanence that it poured a national fortune into buildings meant to outlast the world. That confidence didn't last. Around 2200 BC, the Nile's floods failed. Not for 1 year, but for decades. Modern climate data confirms a serious, prolonged drought across the region. Egypt's entire economic and religious system was built on the assumption that the river would never fail its people, and the river failed. Central authority collapsed. Egypt fractured into competing regional rulers. Contemporary texts describe famine, violence, and social breakdown so severe that some scribes wrote that the natural order of the world had been reversed. This period, which historians call the First Intermediate Period, lasted roughly a century and a half. And that collapse reveals something important about how Egyptians understood government itself. The pharaoh was not simply expected to make laws or command armies. He was supposed to maintain ma'at, the cosmic balance that kept the world ordered. When the state failed, Egyptians could interpret famine, violence, and political chaos not merely as economic problems, but as evidence that the universe itself had fallen out of balance. Restoring political unity therefore meant restoring the natural order, at least in the ideology of the kings. It's a pattern that would repeat throughout Egyptian history, and it's worth naming clearly. Egypt's greatest strength, total dependence on one predictable river, was also its single point of failure. Every collapse in Egyptian history traces back to that same fragile bargain with the Nile. Egypt reunified around 2050 BC under Theban rulers, beginning what we call the Middle Kingdom, a period of reconstruction, expanded trade into Nubia and the Levant, and a wave of literature still studied today. But the fragility never disappeared. It simply waited. Around 1650 BC, a group of Western Asiatic settlers who had been living in the Nile Delta for generations, the Hyksos, took control of northern Egypt entirely. For the first time in its history, Egypt was ruled by foreign kings. What strikes me about this period is how much Egypt actually gained from the people it would later erase from its own records. The Hyksos brought the horse-drawn chariot, composite bows, and new bronze-working techniques into Egypt, technology that Egyptian rulers in the south studied, adopted, and eventually turned against their teachers. Around 1550 BC, a Theban prince named Ahmose finally expelled the Hyksos and reunified Egypt by force. But this time, the mood was different. Egypt had learned that isolation behind its deserts wasn't safety. It was vulnerability. The new kingdom that followed wasn't going to just defend Egypt. It was going to conquer everyone who could ever threaten it again. This is the Egypt most people actually picture: warrior pharaohs, foreign conquest, and staggering wealth. Thutmose III, sometimes called the Napoleon of Egypt, conducted 17 military campaigns and pushed Egyptian borders deeper into the Levant than any pharaoh before him. Egypt was no longer a kingdom. It was an empire. Around 1479 BC, Hatshepsut, widow of a pharaoh and regent for her young stepson, did something almost no woman in the ancient world managed. She declared herself pharaoh in her own right, not queen, not regent, pharaoh, complete with the formal titles, the false beard of kingship, and a 20-year reign defined not by war but by trade, monumental building, and one of the most successful economic expeditions in Egyptian history, to the land of Punt. After her death, her name was chiseled off many of her own monuments, probably by her stepson, securing his own legacy rather than out of simple hatred. It's a reminder that in Egypt, being erased from the record could be a more permanent death than dying at all. A century later came a pharaoh who tried something even more radical. Amenhotep IV changed his own name to Akhenaten and attempted to abolish Egypt's entire pantheon of gods, replacing them with worship of a single deity, the sun disk Aten. He built an entirely new capital city in the desert to escape the powerful priesthood of the old gods. It was, by some readings, the first attempt at monotheism in recorded history, centuries before it would reappear elsewhere in the ancient Near East. It didn't survive him. Within years of his death, Egypt's priests reversed everything. The old gods returned. Akhenaten's new capital was abandoned to the sand, and his young successor, a boy who took the throne at around 9 years old, was forced to restore the old religion his father had tried to erase. That boy's name was Tutankhamun. Here's the paradox at the center of Egypt's most famous name. Tutankhamun accomplished almost nothing. He ruled for perhaps 9 years, died around age 19, likely from complications following a broken leg and possibly malaria, and spent his short reign undoing his father's failed religious revolution. By any real measure of pharaonic power, he's a minor king. He's the most famous pharaoh in the world for one reason only. In 1922, archaeologist Howard Carter found his tomb almost completely intact, one of the only royal tombs in the Valley of the Kings that ancient grave robbers never fully emptied. Over 5,000 objects, including a solid gold death mask weighing over 10 kilograms, sealed for more than 3,000 years. What I find most remarkable about this story isn't the gold. It's what it accidentally proves. History doesn't remember its most powerful people. It remembers whoever left the best preserved evidence behind. Ramesses II ruled for 66 years, fought the largest chariot battle in history at Kadesh, and built more monuments than any pharaoh before or since. And he's still less famous globally than a teenager who died of a broken leg and got lucky enough to be forgotten by looters. Speaking of Ramesses the Great, in 1274 BC, He led roughly 20,000 Egyptian troops against the Hittite Empire at the Battle of Kadesh, the largest chariot battle ever recorded, involving perhaps 5,000 to 6,000 chariots combined. Egyptian temple inscriptions describe it as a total Egyptian victory. Hittite records describe it as a total Hittite victory. Modern historians reading both sides agree on the only honest answer. It was a bloody stalemate that neither empire could actually win. 15 years later, Egypt and the Hittites signed what historians recognize as the oldest surviving peace treaty in world history, inscribed in 2 languages, sealed by royal marriage, and preserved in both Egyptian and Hittite archives. Neither empire had the strength left to keep fighting. They chose survival over pride, and it worked. The treaty held for the rest of both empires' independent existence. Egypt's golden age didn't end in a single battle. It eroded, the same way it had before. Economic strain, succession crises, and outside pressure, all arriving at once. There is a useful distinction here between collapse and disappearance. Egypt did not suddenly stop existing. Farmers still worked the fields, cities still functioned, temples still operated, and people still spoke Egyptian languages and followed ancient traditions. What disappeared was the ability of one central state to project the same overwhelming power it had possessed during the New Kingdom. Civilizations rarely vanish like a light being switched off. More often, their institutions become weaker, their territory becomes harder to control, and their political identity slowly changes while ordinary life continues. Around 1200 BC, the wider eastern Mediterranean was struck by the Bronze Age collapse, the same civilizational catastrophe that ended the Hittite Empire completely and devastated most of the region's major powers. Egypt survived it, barely, but never again as a first-rate military power. What followed was centuries of fragmentation and foreign rule. Libyan dynasties, a Nubian dynasty that conquered Egypt and ruled it as pharaohs in their own right, then Assyrian conquest, then a brief final native revival, and then, in 525 BC, Persian conquest. Egypt, the civilization that had once defined permanence itself, spent its final independent centuries being ruled by outsiders more often than not. In 332 BC, Alexander the Great took Egypt from the Persians without a real fight. Egyptians, exhausted by Persian rule, largely welcomed him as a liberator. After Alexander's death, his general Ptolemy took Egypt as his own share of the shattered empire, founding a Greek-speaking dynasty that would rule Egypt from the Mediterranean city of Alexandria for the next 3 centuries. The Ptolemies built the Library of Alexandria into the greatest center of learning in the ancient world, and ruled as pharaohs in every formal sense, while speaking Greek at court, and rarely, if ever, learning the Egyptian language themselves. It's a strange final chapter. Egypt's throne, occupied by people who were culturally foreign to the civilization they ruled. The last of them broke that pattern entirely. Cleopatra VII was, by most accounts, the first Ptolemaic ruler in 300 years to actually learn to speak Egyptian. She allied with Julius Caesar, then with Mark Antony, in a desperate, brilliant campaign to keep Egypt independent by making herself indispensable to Rome rather than a target of it. It nearly worked. It didn't, In 30 BC, defeated by the future Roman Emperor Augustus, Cleopatra died rather than be paraded through Rome in chains. With her death, 3,000 years of pharaonic rule ended, and Egypt became a Roman province, the personal property of the emperor, valued above all for one thing: its grain, which would go on to feed the city of Rome itself for the next 6 centuries. Egypt outlasted the old Babylonians, the Hittites, the Assyrians, and nearly outlasted Rome itself, at least as an idea. Its writing system took nearly 2,000 years, and a French scholar with a stone found near the town of Rosetta before anyone could read it again. Its gods, its architecture, and its obsession with permanence still shape how we imagine ancient power today. There is another reason Egypt remained so powerful for so long. Geography gave it both protection and connection. Deserts surrounded the Nile Valley, making large-scale invasion difficult, while the river itself created an enormous internal highway. Goods, soldiers, officials, and information could move north and south along the same waterway that carried the harvest. Beyond the river were the Mediterranean, the Red Sea, Nubia, and the Near East. Routes that connected Egypt to foreign metals, timber, luxury goods, and new ideas. Egypt was isolated enough to develop its own identity, but never isolated enough to become completely cut off from the rest of the ancient world. And that helps explain why foreign conquerors so often wanted Egypt instead of simply destroying it. Whoever controlled the Nile could inherit an existing agricultural machine capable of supporting huge populations and armies. Conquering Egypt was therefore not just about taking territory. It meant taking control of one of the richest economic centers in the ancient Mediterranean. Persians, Macedonians, Romans, and later rulers all discovered the same thing. Egypt was extraordinarily difficult to ignore once you understood how much wealth flowed through it. Yet the Egyptians themselves kept adapting. Their gods changed, their capitals moved, dynasties disappeared, and foreign rulers took the throne. But the population continued to preserve older traditions while absorbing new ones. That is why the final centuries of ancient Egypt are so fascinating. They were not simply a long decline. They were thousands of years of culture being repeatedly rewritten without being completely erased. The pyramids are still standing. The pharaohs who built them are not. In the end, that might be the entire lesson Egypt has to offer. Nothing you build outlasts you completely, but the right thing, built well enough, can come extremely close.